Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host, and welcome to the podcast where we answer questions submitted to me from our portal over at paulabernathy.com. Now, all of this, again, is sponsored by Electrical Code Academy Incorporated. And if you want to find out more information on our residential wiring courses, commercial wiring courses, industrial wiring courses, maybe even grounding and bonding, or you're really studying for an electrical exam and you want the best exam prep course on the market, then check out our Fast Tracks program. But all of that, you can get it at www.electricalcodeacademy.net.org or .com. Any of those, you can get the answers there. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. There's an actual feature on the site where you can ask questions live, and it'll be answered by my staff, and they'll give you any assistance that you may need in making your decision which course you need and things like that. So again, check that out if you need to get some electrical training. All right, so Ask Paul is a portal that allows people to submit questions, and I answer them, some via email, some make it to the air for shows like tonight's show. And I like it because it allows me the ability to reach and connect with the submitter and answer a question. Obviously, we have pressing questions from time to time about codes and things like that. So I like being a resource, and I created this to kind of streamline my ability to answer questions for folks out there. And I've been doing this for over 32 years. Serve on Code Making Panel 5 and 17, and previously worked for NEMA. And so I've been around the block. I've been an inspector, a head inspector, engineer for multiple jurisdictions in Virginia. So I've been around a little bit. So I like to answer questions. And again, I've been doing this for quite a while, so I'm pretty confident in my responses. So that's what makes it's such a benefit for folks to be able to go to the paulabernathy.com website. That thing is set up for you to be able to ask your question easy. Click the button. It sends it right in. It puts it in a real neat location for me to be able to get to those questions and really get you the answers you need. So on tonight's episode, we've got two questions. And so I'm going to tackle each one of them. And again, you'll kind of get an idea of how we do this podcast. And they're not overly long podcasts. They're informative podcasts. They're kind of like my Code in 5, but I needed a little longer than 5 minutes to answer some of the questions that I get from the Ask Paul portal. So again, this is kind of like our Code in 5 thing. I also should remind people real quick before we get into this, you'll probably notice that a lot of my videos and a lot of my podcasts and things like that are disappearing from YouTube. That's because we've gone to a subscription plan. We have a lot of new content coming out on the residential wiring, a lot of videos that are associated with it. There's going to literally be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos dedicated to these new series that we're starting. But there's still hundreds of videos and podcasts over there now on our website. The difference now, it is a subscription service. So when you go to the website, electricalcodeacademy.com, .net, or .org, it doesn't matter. You'll see at the top a subscription button, and you'll see a members button. When you subscribe and you set up your account, it's a monthly membership that you can cancel at any time. It gives you access to the members area. It also gives you access to our Wednesday night live sessions that are not open to the general public, only to subscribers. And it's exam preparation. But it doesn't mean you can't come and ask other electrical questions. Open game there. You know, I'm here to answer questions for not only our students of the Fast Tracks program, but other folks as well that are part of the membership. Okay, so we're kind of moving away from our YouTube platforms, and everything's being in-house, all from our website. So check that out. It's a great service, and also exclusive message boards, and then you get direct access to me. Plus, you get discounts at electricianpride.com. That's awesome, too, because we have some really neat swag there to show off your accomplishment as a master electrician or a journeyman or what have you. So check all those things out. We'd love to see you in the subscription program. Okay, so today's episode, we're going to read a question that was submitted to me so that we can see what we got going on with this thing. Let's see. Here's the first question. So the first question says, "Hey, Paul, I'm reading about conduit bodies and FS boxes. Okay. It says if an FS box has a single hub, okay, and it enters a concrete slab less than 18 inches from the box, does the concrete slab count as a support? Next, it says, so obviously there's a bunch of questions in here. Next, it says, would it make a difference if the box is attached to a block wall? Yeah, but let's keep going. It says, and or if RMC runs out the box. Using Article 314.23E and 314.23F, I see I need more than one conduit. And all the exceptions talk about conduit bodies. And an FS box isn't a conduit body. Can you help clarify? Okay, so there's a lot of pieces in this question, and the submitter absolutely got it right in a sense that we'll be talking about 314.23E and 314.23F. So I'm going to paint you some scenarios. First problem I have is he says it's an FS box with a single hub. Typically, FS boxes have more than one hub in it or internal threading. So it's usually a top and a bottom, that type of scenario. If I had an FS box with a single hub, then I would have a problem with 314.23E or F. Because it requires these two or more conduits threaded watertight into the enclosure or hub. So that's a requirement for both of these. And it's whether or not the actual box was without a device, luminaire, or lamp holder, but it's being supported by the Raceway, or if it was a device, luminaire, or lamp holder in the box or at the box or supported by the box that is also being supported by Raceway. So there's a difference, okay, in how you would approach this. So we're going to look at both approaches and be able to answer his question. But the first question is, if it was a box and it only had one hub in it, then you wouldn't be able to use it for this application anyway. Okay, so that answers that question up front. The next part of that is, if it did have the box and let's say it has two entries, then it would have to be, and let's say they're on one side of the box, let's say, like coming up out of the ground, that type of thing, connecting to an FS box, let's say, then you have to have, it has to be secured within 18 inches. Now, in his question, if it comes out of a concrete slab, let's say, and it comes up, but it doesn't come up 18 inches, so, and we'll see the rule here, we'll read it in a second, then I would consider the concrete as being a securement and a supporting component for that Raceway. Okay, so we'll kind of look at that, but I think that would be adequate for that application as being considered secure or account as a support. Remember, we have to follow all of the code rules, so we'll read them, but I think that would be sufficient. And then he goes on to say, would it make a difference if it's connected to a block wall? Absolutely. Because if you connect the box to a block wall, then it is no longer being supported solely by a Raceway. And if that's the case, and you can come in with one side into one, entry into one side if you want, it'd be perfectly fine. That wouldn't be an issue. So the whole concept here is supporting the enclosure. And can you support the enclosure from a Raceway? That's what we're kind of looking at here. So let's kind of take the code and look at it real quick and kind of answer these questions. Now I will read the exact code and kind of, if I can, to make it easier, I'll paraphrase down, but we'll kind of look at it. So let's talk about the first condition. This is where we have an enclosure, and it is a Raceway supported enclosure. So it's actually like a box that's being supported from Raceways. Let's say one coming in from the left and one coming in from the right, and it's out in the middle of free air, let's say, and it, obviously the box needs to be supported, but in this case, the enclosure is being supported by the Raceway. So what does the code say if you want to do that? All right, well, it says an enclosure that does not contain a device other than splicing devices, just like wire bonding devices inside of it, or supports luminaires or lamp holders or other equipment, and is supported by entering Raceways, shall not exceed 100 cubic inches. Okay, so first of all, the box, if it doesn't have any devices, it doesn't have any luminaires, doesn't have any lamp holders being supported by the box as well, and as long as the box does not exceed 100 cubic inches, all right? So we have a box size dimension requirement. So for the Raceway to support this enclosure, it cannot exceed 100 cubic inches of volume box. Okay, we got that. Next, it says it shall have threaded entries or identified hubs. Okay, so we get that. And it says it shall be supported by 2 or more conduits threaded wrench tight into the enclosure or hubs. Okay, so they have to screw into it. So that's by proxy gonna limit us, right? That's gonna limit us to things like intermediate metal conduit with threaded ends or rigid conduit with threaded ends, because it has to thread directly into the enclosure, right? Or the hub, and most of the time, hubs that mount on top or side of boxes or enclosures, they're listed for rigid or intermediate metal conduit, not for PVC and other types of applications like that. So indirectly, this is what we're getting for this application at this stage of the game. Okay, and when it says they have to be made up wrench tight into the enclosure, kind of tells me it's got to be a conduit with threaded entry, right? Next, it says each conduit. Okay, so it's got to have 2 or more. Now, again, this could be coming in one from the left side and one from the right side. That is 2 that's supporting. I get it. It says each conduit shall be secured within 3 feet of the enclosure. So that's 36 inches. So you measure from the box on one side. Let's say, again, we're coming in one from the left and one from the right. So the box is trying to be suspended in midair, if you will. Then as long as you go have a securement, okay, within 36 inches of the box, then you're okay. And that's on each side. And you're fine. That's not going to be a problem. But it also says, well, what if it says, or within 18 inches, if the enclosure, within 18 inches of the enclosure, if all conduit entries are on the same side. So this is allowing me to support a box in free air, if you will, to kind of make it easier for you to understand. Free air, if I've got 2 Raceway entries on one side, and as long as within 18 inches of the box that it is secured. Now, the question he's asking me, and the question is, if it's in concrete, would it still be considered secure? And I think it would be. If these 2 Raceways are coming out of the concrete, and let's say they're poking out of concrete and they're only going 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, and they go into a box, because they have to be rigid or intermediate based on what we just saw, then they're not going anywhere. Trust me, they're fine. They will be able to easily support it, because you got to remember, there's no devices, luminaires, or lamp holders being supported by this enclosure. All we're talking about is the enclosure being supported by the Raceway. So there would be no harm, no foul here. Okay. But again, there's nothing in here that would allow a single entry into the box to do this. Okay. So pick your boxes wisely, I guess, is the rule here. Now, there is an exception to this rule, and he kind of alluded it in the question. And the exception says, where the following wiring methods shall be permitted, because so this isn't a permissive statement under the exception. It's not a requirement. It's permissive, because you don't have to use the exception at all. You can use what the code said. It says, shall be permitted to support a conduit body of any size, including a conduit body constructed with only 1 conduit entry, provided that the trade size of the conduit body is not larger than the largest trade side of the conduit or tubing that's supplying it, for example. So here it gives you 5 different methods here. I can use IMC, RMC, PVC. It can use RTRC or even EMT. Remembering now, this is for a conduit body. That is not an enclosure. If you think about, is it like an LB or a conduit or something that's classified I shouldn't say classified, that's listed and identified as a conduit body, that is not an FS box, obviously, as he stated. So that's not the allowance for you to be able to use a single raceway or something like that to do that. Okay, one conduit entry. So the general rule would apply if you're doing a conduit body. The conduit bodies typically are not all that heavy. There's no room in it to be able to really put anything in it. It's not what you would do anyway. So it's no harm, no foul for that application. It can be supported. Not a big deal. All right, so again, so that's where a raceway can support an enclosure, but nothing's in it. Now, let's talk about what happens when the raceway supported enclosure actually has devices in it, or it supports a luminaire or a lamp holder from it. Okay, so this might be something where a box is there and it has an actual flood lamp on it, or flood light holder, or something on it that's actually a lamp holder that's actually emitting light, like maybe 2 flood heads on it or something like that. Okay, 2 floodlight heads. So anyway, so what we're doing here is we have the luminaire, or we have the lamp holders mounted to the box. The box is in free air, but it's connected to raceways. What does the rules say here? Okay, well, first thing it says, and in the code, we're in 314.23F, by the way, if you're following along, says an enclosure that contains a device other than splicing devices. Again, we're not going to worry about any splices that are in the box. It says, or supports a luminaire or a lamp holder or other equipment and is supported by entering raceways. Okay, so the whole concept here is the raceways are doing the supporting of the box. Okay, shall not exceed 100 cubic inches in size. Okay, so we still have the 100 cubic inch threshold to be supported by a raceway. Still have that. It goes on to say it shall have threaded entries or identified hubs. It shall be supported by 2 or more conduits threaded wrench tight into the enclosure or hub. And it says each conduit shall be secured within 18 inches of the enclosure. So the difference between this one before, where it had no devices, no luminaires, no lamp holders, and this one where the box does have potentially devices or luminaires or lamp holders, you now have to make sure that your securement from the box doesn't go further than 18 inches. Okay, so if it's in the ceiling, let's say, and it's going from let's say beam to beam, then you could have a raceway go span from beam to beam with the box in the middle of it suspended, as long as it wasn't more than 18 inches from the secure point of the raceway before it gets to the box that's suspended. Okay, so I have to, if you're measuring from the box, I have to have securement within 18 inches, okay, to be able to do that. And again, that's for if you have a luminaire, lamp holders, or devices that are in that enclosure that's being supported by the raceway. And again, these would be rigid metal or intermediate metal only, because it talks about threading into the box. Okay, with me? All right, I think that actually answered the question. Now, there is 2 exceptions here. We won't get into them. This one, when you do have an enclosure that does have devices or supports luminaires or lamp holders, you have an exception which is allowing you to be able to support a conduit body again. But the difference between the other one and this one is this one still requires rigid metal or intermediate metal to support the conduit body. And it will let you have only one entry. Let's say you could go into one side of the conduit body and still support it. And the other rules still apply, is that the trade size of the conduit body is not larger than the largest trade size that actually of the conduit that enters it. Then you're okay. And typically they're designed that way. So that's the exception. And exception number 2 is allowing me to have an unbroken length. This has to do with conduits where that might go over the edge of a building to be able to maybe do a light for accent lighting or shining back. It's not really germane to the question that was submitted, so I'm going to try to stick to the Ask Pauls by just answering the questions for the individuals and not turning it into an overly long lesson. But there you go. So that's that question. The next question that's submitted to me tonight for everybody it says, and I'm going to read this one to you again. It says, "Hi, Paul. I'm currently working in Unit 2 of your Fast Tracks program or course, 2017 edition. He said, the information provided states that a garage door must be GFCI protected for personnel, citing 210.8A2. The code shows previously that, quote, the GFCI shall be installed in a readily accessible location, end quote. Some of our local garages here in Maryland have ceilings you need to access with a ladder, making them not readily accessible. Okay. Would this fall more onto Code Article 215.9 as a feeder to the garage door receptacle? Okay, there's a lot we're going to have to explain here. Therefore, requiring a GFCI breaker for the ceiling receptacle and also making it readily accessible. I'm sure it is not an overcurrent device, so it's not Article 250.24A4, making the ladder okay for accessibility. What I'm reading sounds like a GFCI receptacle cannot be installed unless it's readily accessible. So a breaker solves my problem of accessibility, or am I missing something?" Okay, I'm going to say you're missing something because first thing, let's kind of talk about the first part of your statement. Yes, receptacles in garages do require GFCI protection. Very true. And that is covered in 210.8A2. Very much. We're okay there. Now remember, this is receptacle requirements in 210.8 protection. So just because we have the receptacle, let's say in the ceiling for a garage door opener, it is in the garage. So it does have to be GFCI protected, no doubt. But nothing says that the GFCI device can be there because it wouldn't be readily accessible. In the beginning of 210.8, it says, in the very last sentence, it says the ground fault circuit interrupters shall be installed in a readily accessible location. So you would put the GFCI device somewhere else that was readily accessible. Maybe it's down on the wall, or maybe it is a breaker, those type of options. But you're not going to put a GFCI device in the ceiling. Okay? The receptacles only have to be accessible, and they can be reached by ladders and things like that. It's the readily accessible part that you can't comply with. So you would not put a GFCI device in the ceiling receptacle. But yet, yes, you do have to protect that receptacle that's in the ceiling because it's in the garage with GFCI protection. Now, the reference to 215.9, I mean, it's not even worth discussing because 215 is feeders, and you would never have a feeder to a receptacle. That would always be a branch circuit. Okay, so that's not going to be issue. So that's obviously not have anything to do with that one. So, and then 240.24A for that, again, that's talking about overcurrent protected devices. In 240, it's really not germane to what the question was, because your question's about the receptacle in the garage. And does it need to be GFCI protected? Absolutely, it needs to be GFCI protected, without a doubt. But that is there's multiple ways to do this without putting a GFCI receptacle in the ceiling location, which means that it would not be readily accessible as defined in Article 100. But I can put it somewhere else that is readily accessible. So you do have to think about your wiring layout and how you lay things out. Most certainly, you would have to think about that. All right. So the one thing though with this, I do want to bring to your attention. I don't know, and I think the question might have asked. It says you were in Maryland. I think it said Maryland. One of the things you have to think about is which code cycle you're actually on, for clarity. Because I can bring up something that, again, in the 2020 code, for example, because since we're talking about the circuit and the receptacles that are in the ceiling versus the requirement for the garage branch circuit. Now, if you're in the code, that's 210.11C4, and this is a garage branch circuit requirement. And if you look at it and you look at the 2017 code, and I'll do that so we can kind of do this, since we might as well have a little bit of a lesson here while we're here anyway. I'll read you the difference in the two. I'm going to kind of give you a little bonus here. So we kind of answered your question. But when it comes to the branch circuit, now we do know that inside of the garage, if I have a 3-car garage, for example, I have to have a receptacle for each one of those vehicle bays. So that means I have to have at least 3 receptacles in there. Each one must be positioned to serve that each individual bay. And when you put these in there, they can't be higher than 5.5 feet. So those that are there for the vehicle bays could not be in the ceiling. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Now, that's the receptacle requirement. That's required for the vehicle bays. That has nothing to do with other applications. That's just for those vehicle bays, right? All right, so then let's say, okay, so when it comes to the branch circuit that I have to run for that, that is when we have to look at 210.11 C4. All right. And again, so I should probably tell you the receptacle requirements were in 210.52G, to have them for each vehicle bay. All right. So let's kind of go back to the branch circuit, because again, it kind of gets back to what your question is. Okay. You understand now you can't put the GFCI in the ceiling. The other people say, but can I put those receptacles in the ceiling on with the same circuit that I put for the receptacles that serve each vehicle bay? And so that's kind of, I'm going to give a twofer today. Let's read it. So here's what it says in the 2017 code. In case you're in the 2017, because I can't remember for the life of me what Maryland's on. So I'll go with this. And here's what it says. It says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, when it says that, other parts of this section, it's talking about the small appliance, the laundry, and the bathroom stuff. That's what it means. It says, at least one 120-volt, 20-ampere branch circuit shall be installed to supply receptacle outlets in attached garages and in detached garages with electric power. This circuit shall have no other outlets. Okay, so this is not prohibiting me at this stage in the 2017 code from putting those ceiling receptacles on with the receptacles that would be for each vehicle bay. All right. This is just saying I have to have at least one 120-volt, 20-amp branch circuit. Now, can I have more than one in there? Absolutely. Can I have a 15-amp circuit in there for something? Absolutely. Okay. This is saying I have to have at least the one. Okay. And it's directly telling me to supply the receptacle outlets in attached garage and detached. Okay. Now, with this language in the 2017, if I wanted to run a 20 amp and do those, let's say 3-car garage and put 3 receptacles, less than 5.5 feet or less, then I would be good. I would fine. And I wanted to run a separate circuit to hit a receptacle in there and then jump up and hit the receptacles in the ceiling, I'd be okay as well under this, the way this rule is written. Okay. But the way this is written, I could pick up all of those receptacles if they're 20 amp circuit on this. Okay. Now, when you go to the 2020 code, you notice it's a little different. It says, now here's the 2020 code. It says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, at least one 120-volt, 20-ampere branch circuit shall be installed to supply receptacle outlets required by 210.52G1 for attached garages and detached garages with electric power. This circuit shall have no other outlets. Okay, so this is different because this is saying that at least one 120-volt, 20-amp branch circuit that you're supplying those receptacles that are serving the vehicle bays in accordance with 210.52G1, that is all they can supply. That is it. It could not supply the receptacles in the ceiling. Okay? The way this rule is, because those receptacles in the ceiling are not the outlets that are required by 210.52G1. Okay? So you would have to run a separate branch circuit, which you can. You can have multiple branch circuits. There's nothing that says you can't do that. Okay? But when it says the circuit shall have no other outlets, then it shall have no other outlets other than those that are there served by the requirements of 210.52G1. And the 210.52G1 specifically tells you what those receptacles are and what they're for. And if you go look at it, it will tell you in each garage, attached garage, and in each detached garage with electric power, it says at least one receptacle outlet shall be installed in each vehicle bay and not more than 5.5 feet above the floor. You with me? So that is a significant change for the 2020 code. Just be careful what you're doing and where you're at. I kind of answered your question with the GFCI, but you have to be careful. So if you're in the 2017 code and you're supplying those receptacles for each vehicle bay, and then you want to pop up and hit the receptacles in the ceiling, go for it. Under 2020 code, you're not going to do that. You're going to need a separate circuit for that. Okay. All right. Anyway, hopefully I answered your question. But again, no, your GFCI cannot be in the ceiling. It cannot be up there. It would not be readily accessible per definition. But hopefully you got something out of that. Again, also neat to kind of look at the difference between the 2017 language and the 2020 language to kind of see what you can do and what you can't do. I will remind you that in both the 2017 or the 2020, nothing prohibited me from having additional branch circuits in the garage. This is a minimum requirement. You have to have at least one, but I could have others. And the others do not have to be 20 amps. You could have, for example, a central vac that's installed in your garage, and you want to run a 15 amp, depending on what the label is on the central vac. I can have a branch circuit run into that and be okay in that bathroom, hit a receptacle that maybe the central vac plugs into. For years, it was thought that, you can only have 20 amp branch circuits in a garage. And no, that's not the case. You have to have at least the one, and it has to serve its function, but then you could have additional if you want, that type of thing. So anyway, that is tonight's Ask Paul. Hopefully you got something out of that. If you have any questions that you want to ask, and you want to submit them to me, please just visit paulabernathy.com. That's PaulAbernathy.com. Submit your question, and I will respond either via email or you'll be selected to be in one of our upcoming podcasts. So until next time, stay safe and God bless.